So about this talk, we have Dr. Robin Vijayan with us, who will be talking about the changes that he has witnessed in the Shola ecosystems in the Nilgiris, and specifically the story of certain woody biomass and certain species of trees slowly ingressing into the grassland component of the sholas and changing the nature of these ecosystems. Now, we all know that grasslands are under a lot of stress all over the country, grasslands of different kinds. So the issue of grassland conservation, I'm sure, speaks to many of us. But specifically talking about the sholas, these ecosystems are, we all know they are very unique. So they are isolated, they are high altitude, but they also have this very beautiful and delicate matrix of light green grasslands on one side and then dark shades of evergreen dense rainforests in the valleys on the other. So I personally find them to be immensely beautiful and inspiring. But their beauty aside, the sholas also harbor a higher diversity of birds, animals, and fishes and other invertebrates. And and in terms of water and food security, many of our southern rivers actually also originate in the sholas. So if you're joining us, like me, if you're joining us from anywhere in the south, then we have to appreciate that our water that we're drinking and the food may have some dependence on the health of the sholas and how important it is to conserve this unique ecosystem. So I'll now introduce our speaker, Dr. Robin. He is an ecologist and evolutionary biologist who studies birds in the wild to understand different aspects of biodiversity around us. And in his research, he uses a combination of genetic, acoustic, and remote sensing data to conduct his research. He's also an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Science, Education, and Research in Tirupati. And he has worked on the birds of the Shola habitat since 2000. So I'll now hand it over to him so he can share with us the stories that these birds have been telling him. Dr. Robin,
Yeah,
over to you.
yeah. Hi. Thanks, Mandeep and Arjun and the rest of the ERA team. It's great to be here, and it's a great platform to be speaking at. I'm really excited about this. Having said that, I mean, I feel like a little bit, I have an imposter syndrome here because I don't actually do any restoration. So, but there are some things that I've learned. I study birds, as Mandeep pointed out. And over the course of the years that I've been studying birds, we've tried to understand what the habitats are like. Sorry, Mandeep, I fixed my computer, so I can now, project myself. So if you can enable screen sharing.
Yeah, just a
Uh,
moment.
yeah. What I'm happy to share with you is a few of the things that we've learned, and it's been very iterative. We did one thing and then moved to another, and so on. So I'd like to kind of take you on this journey that we've had so far.
You
Um,
should be able to share your presentation now.
yeah, let me just do that. Yeah, can you see the entire screen now?
Yes, Dr. Robin.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm going to talk about is data and some of the ideas that we've had. On the top right are two key collaborators who've been part of this journey, Arundhati Das and Milind Banyan. Um, yeah, we did a bunch of remote sensing, satellite imagery based work. And then on the bottom left are Abhimanyu Lele and Jobin Varghese. Jobin's been a PhD student with me, and he just completed and is now at NCBS. And Abhimanyu worked with me before his PhD, and now he's in University of Chicago working on his PhD. And of course, the landscape that I'm talking to you about is the Shola Sky Islands. Sky Islands because these are mountain tops isolated from each other. So birds and the habitats is broadly what I'm going to talk about. But I just wanted to quickly mention that my lab group, fairly large number of us, work on some of these aspects, which are landscape ecology and conservation. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. But our bread and butter stuff that we do is bird evolution and biogeography, where we collect blood samples from birds from across India, try to understand their evolutionary patterns, how we have the species that we have, and so on. And bioacoustics and behavior, this is something that I'm very excited about. We are basically, we work with songs of these birds, and we are able to understand quite a lot about them. It provides some unique insights on the cultural diversity as well. Um, the biogeography part was interesting because that is what actually led us to understand that these mountains, so what you're seeing here is the Western Ghat, and the dark brown, if you can see my pointer, is where the high elevation mountains are. Those are the sky islands. And our genetic data actually showed that some of these mountains are so isolated from each other that birds, even birds that can fly fairly, they're known to fly, birds, but they also have divergences. That means they've been isolated for millions of years on these mountains. What this kind of told us is that each mountain is actually unique. Each mountain has its own species, and that was a very powerful, point that about 10, 15 years of research brought home. And a lot of the work that has been done has been on this one species, which is the white-bellied Shola, earlier known as shortwing, where we have a lot of data on birds, the songs, female songs, and so on, and genetics, of course. But one thing that caught our attention is that while I was studying, mostly I was studying the forest birds, we realized that when we were trying to look at multiple different species in the Shola, the Nilgiri pipit, and we were chasing this bird, we're trying to get samples from it and so on, and we found that it was actually very difficult to catch them. And that's when we started focusing our attention on grasslands. And this, what this figure here on the right shows is a tree of relationship of birds. And it's quite simple, actually. The Nilgiri pipit has, what it shows is that it has a very unique lineage, very quite distinct from most of the other pipits. But what's the main point here is that the in terms of evolution, this species evolved about 7 million years from its closest relative. Compare that to paddy field pipit, which is about 1 million years old. So the point that I'm trying to make is that just like the forest species that we spoke about earlier, like these birds, which are all found in the forest, uh, and everybody today recognizes that these are very unique species found on the high elevation mountain tops of Western Ghats and so on. But what's less known is the role of grasslands. And that's where, this really drove home the point that the Nilgiri pipit, being so old, has been in this landscape for a long time. And I think all of you know the story of invasion in the landscape, most likely. So what's happened is very simple. People have planted exotic species of Acacia, Eucalyptus, and pine, and they have become invasive across large part of the tropics, but certainly in the Shola area. So what I'm going to show you here is an animation. It's a map based on remote sensing data. And on the top, you will see the year. That's the year of the satellite imagery. So it goes from 1973, 95, and 2017. And in the map, you will see some major colors. The greens are natural habitat. So the light green is the grassland and the dark green is the forest. And in this purplish color that you see, that's the timber plantations. That's the acacia, eucalyptus, and pine. And the pink color is the tea plantation. So what you can see is that as you go from 1970s, where you have a lot of grasslands, and as you approach 2017, you see that most of this area, this is the Anamalai Hills. On the left is Munnar somewhere here, and Kodaikanal is somewhere here. So in this landscape, especially the Palni Hills landscape, more than 60% of the landscape has been taken over by expanding acacia, and in some parts eucalyptus, and in some parts of the landscape even pine. So this was actually, very, very startling. And this pattern kind of holds true even in the Nilgiris. This is the Nilgiris, where you can see, acacia, they basically all of these timber invasives moving into the western front, the Mukurti National Park is over there. I will come to the point of what was before 1973, but I think today we know quite a bit about the landscape. One thing that came out very clearly was a little bit contradictory to what I grew up, thinking of conservation, which is of forests. I kept thinking that forest conservation is what is the main thing. I kind of ignored the grasslands for a while. And this is there in my papers as well. In the scientific papers, I argue about forest fragmentation. I really didn't think about grasslands initially. But one of the main things that you can see from this data is this is based on Landsat imageries, and that has 30-meter resolution. We have a lot of ground truth data all across the landscape. But look at this table on the bottom right, and you can see that the forest loss and grassland loss, you can see the differences, right? So forest loss is actually very less, but look at the grassland loss and look at the percentage. So essentially what we learned from this whole exercise is that the loss in the shola habitat is not really a forest. I mean, forests are doing fairly okay. I mean, it doesn't mean we stop conserving them, but the real loss is in the grasslands. And this is all of the the shola habitat, starting from Chikmagalur, which is one, and then you can go down the Coorg and Wayanad area in 5, and 6 is Nilgiris. I'm pointing to the map on the left. And then 7 and 8 are Anamalais and Palnis, and 9 is Highways, and 10 is Ashambu Hills, right? And most of this change has happened in this, what you can see, the central, what we call the high elevation areas, 6, 7, and 8 on this map. So I hope this part is quite clear. So what happened at this point was that, I met Bob and Tanya, who were in Kodaikanal at that time. Unfortunately, they have passed on and are no longer with us. But while they were there, they really moved a lot of my focus from forest birds to the grasslands. And one of the things that we came up with, we discussed quite a lot. And when we showed the forest department the data, this data that I'm pointing to now, what they said was, what use is it just telling us that there is all this change and everything? Why don't you make a prioritization map? Why don't you tell us which areas we should focus our action on? And that's where Bob and Tanya came in. And they said that ecologically, what makes most sense is to look at the lightly invaded areas. Because if you want to restore, the restoration needs to kind of result in more grasslands, which was the native habitat at that location. So their logic was that by mapping, like going from the invasion front, if you're actually restoring there, not only are you protecting the existing grasslands, but you're also kind of pushing back the invasion. And the floor already has grasses, so you probably don't have to do much. And this was like excellent logic, and it's also what restoration practitioners seem to follow everywhere. So they said, map the intact grasslands for conservation, look at the lightly invaded areas, and then, move to the other areas which are difficult to restore. So here's, you can see the figure, on the right, you have the grasslands, and then on the left, you see the invaded kind of areas. Some of the things that we found was that, there were these isolated trees in grasslands. So you can have large stretches of grassland, and then some isolated trees uh, somewhere, and there you can see germination as well. So there are kind of saplings and things like that coming. And you can see these little dots, of saplings all across the grasslands in many locations. Uh, and this is of various ages and stages that you can see. Um, and then we found these mature exotic trees. Some of the trees are no longer small saplings, but fairly large trees, large stands of large trees. And so what we did was we said, let us follow what Bob and Tanya had initially outlined, and let's look at, we call priority one as areas which are intact grasslands and also lightly invaded grasslands. That's what is here. And then isolated trees and grasslands, which I just described. The logic is that you can remove these invasive elements, and then you get back a large area of grasslands. And then restoration priority two is where you still have a lot of trees, mature trees, but there is still some grass. There's some element of grass which is there, which means that you can remove the big trees, and at least you have some starting point with the native grass that's there. And in some cases, the grass is probably only in the marshes and along the streams and things like that, where the exotic trees could not establish. But even then, that is still better than starting in some of the mature exotic tree areas. So priority three, which I'm not showing you because it's just a blanket canvas of, very big trees and nothing on the floor. Basically, you have only maybe some shade tolerant grasses, if at all anything, on the floor. Uh, so this is what we came up with. We came up with this based on this priority 1, 2, 3, and of course, the pristine grassland. I think what's really notable is look at the area. The total area that needs to be restored with invasion is way more than what the existing grasslands are today. And both states have a fair share of areas that have to be restored. And you're talking about 362 square kilometer versus, priority three is the big timber trees, 600 square kilometers of them. But I think what we were trying to focus the attention of the governments to is this priority one, which is 157 square kilometers that they can target right away. So what we did was we then created these maps according to what we just discussed, these priorities. And we did this for every division. And we gave the forest department maps like this. This is Eraviculam National Park, which has very little invasion, very little exotic trees in it. But in Tamil Nadu also, we did the same thing. For example, in Kodaikanal, we made range level maps with these polygons. And as you can see, all of these are clickable. So what we did was we created a presentation, gave it to the forest department at each division. And what we were thinking was the range officer can pass this on to, let's say, a beat officer or someone. And when they are actually on the ground, they can click this on their phone, and they should, the Google Maps that it launches, you should be able to kind of see where you are. Of course, we have 90 something percent accuracy technically, but these things are very difficult, to map. We took a long time to figure this out. What that means is that on the ground, the reality may be slightly different. And often this problem is only with the borders. So what instead of arguing and saying that this is the absolute truth, what we were trying to say was that, here's the best data that we have today. So, go with this. If you want to modify something, go on the field and modify the boundaries of where your priority one and priority two are. But at least go in the general direction with some logic. So this is what we were kind of aiming for. So we did this for all the different ranges, Kodaikanal range, Devadanampatti, and so on. And we gave them, each range, we gave them that these many hectares you have in priority 1, 2, 3, and so on. So technically, I think they had all the data that they should have to restore a little bit, let's say, scientifically. So we pointed them in that direction at least. This is before any restoration started. And meanwhile, there were quite a few of us in the Tamil Nadu High Court had a public interest litigation. And along with me, a few others, Shankaraman from NCF and some others were also on the High Court appointed committee to advise the court on how the restoration should progress. And we were providing all this data also through the court to the government. So we were also providing it directly, and we also through the court, just so that we thought something might come through. And the court did fantastic. I mean, they took the maps, they took the data, and they said this is the way restoration should progress. And they asked the state to kind of clear large areas for restoration. Yeah, it's the same for Nilgiris. We did the same thing there as well. These are just maps of that area also. Now, some areas, so actually it should be fairly straightforward. There's this place called Mishapuli. It became very famous because I think somebody tweeted or there was something about some snow or something in Mishapuli, and a lot of Malayalis gathered there very quickly last New Year's. But anyway, it's a fantastic high elevation plateau and still accessible to tourists. So if you haven't gone, if you want to see a lot of rolling grasslands, this is probably one of the places where you can go and see it. But one thing that so you can see the rhododendron there, right? But unfortunately, one thing that's happening is that there's a lot of young pine that's kind of growing speckled all over the landscape, very large areas. And there's also like there's a pine plantation, and the pine it's so thick. There are these cross, they grow cross. You can't even walk through them. And there's acacia which grows under the pine. So there's like double kind of invasion that's happening as well. So people say pine is not invasive. That's probably true in many areas, but like I'm showing you now, it does seem to happen in some situations. Probably those are some ecological situations where something like this happens. I don't know enough about plant ecology, but I'm sure that there's some things that make this happen. Um, so I also wanted to kind of give you an idea of the current scenario of what kind of restoration actions are happening on the ground. This is in Kodaikanal. Actually, very large areas are being restored there, are being cleared, I should say. Unfortunately, you can't see it on with satellite imageries. So if you look at Google Earth imageries, you won't see them. You can't see these areas. The latest Landsat imageries can somewhat detect it, but it's still very low resolution. You can't really make out what's happening on the ground. So we do need higher resolution imageries. But please, if you go on the ground, what you will see is that some strange things, because initially the court had ordered that all the acacia should be removed. They were targeting acacia, and rightly so, because acacia is probably the largest invasive there. But the court said remove acacia. So the forest department went ahead and removed acacia. They didn't remove eucalyptus or pine. So that's I mean, yes, you're removing, but the goal of restoring to the grassland is not being met. So you have this huge eucalyptus stands, and I'll come back to what that implies. Uh, but more worrisome was the fact that they were planting, native shola trees there, because for some reason, I mean, this is the direction that they went. Uh, and you can also see that, in some cases, pine is not removed. but Ageratina and other weeds had slowly started moving into these cleared areas. And you can see, how this has changed between December 22 when we went there and from May 24. Ageratina and other things have started kind of covering the landscape. And those are the Shola forest trees in the sleeves. It's not just in Tamil Nadu. In Kerala, there is this, I lost the photograph, but there's this fantastic site, Pattiyangal, which is near Vattavada. If you know Munnar, it's a little bit away from Munnar, um, near Pampadum Shola, actually. And here, what happened was there was a fire. It's unclear whether it was set by people or not, but a large area. This is what you can see. This area was a woodland lot. It had acacia in it, and it caught fire. And by 2015, the forest department decided to use that as an experimental site to kind of restore to grasslands. And they did really well. They put these all the acacia logs, they lined it up along the contour to prevent soil erosion. And then they planted grass and so on. And they let a lot of grass come by itself. And it was looking really great. I mean, I was really impressed. They were getting students to come. There's a dormitory there. Pamarum Sholas, there's a forest department dormitory. So they used to have these nature education camps where students used to come and do weeding, regular weeding, removal of any acacia saplings that were coming up and so on. All that went great until the funding for that stopped. And then you can see by 2017 and 2020, that areas like kind of started getting covered by invasion again, secondary invasion and other things. So so right now, I think the non-native species have again kind of taken over. So I think the moral of the story here is that, which I don't need to tell you all, is that there needs to be persistent efforts at this restoration. It can't be a one-off activity. I have to add that Kerala has done quite a few more plots where they have planted other grass and so on. So they are doing quite a lot right now in the Munnar landscape. The other interesting aspect that I wanted to kind of bring up is eucalyptus, because in many parts of Palni Hills, you can actually see that eucalyptus, and there are many species, I agree, and I don't know which species we're talking about, but in the genus Eucalyptus, there are, you can clearly see some invasion. You can see young saplings, and you can see all the different age categories. And this is very clear in Vattanal. Strangely, it's not so evident in the Nilgiris. But one thing that, so why bother, as I was pointing to how the forest department was removing acacia, but not removing the eucalyptus. So why bother? One of the points is that one of my students, Jobin, that I was pointing to, he collected a lot of data across the Shola landscape, and he finds very high secondary invasion in eucalyptus. What that means is, I mean, this is just a lot of data. What it shows is this green thing is eucalyptus, this area, and lantana, for example, is largely coming up in areas with eucalyptus plantation. So that is secondary invasion in some sense. So you have the timber overstory, which is kind of uh, uh, assisting probably this secondary invasion. So now I'm coming to the last part of what I wanted to talk about, and that is, why does it really matter? One of the things I want to kind of loop back is about the Nilgiri pipit. So this is what I have, the graph I have here. X-axis is latitude. So from the right to the left is from south to north, and then y-axis is elevation. So what you're seeing is, like, if you were to slice a cake, and you look at the cake from the side, that's what we're doing with the Western Ghats. So we're slicing the Western Ghats at its highest points, and this is what that looks like. And if you think that Shola habitat is about 1,500 meters elevation, the Nilgiri pipit is found only about 1,800. So it's really found only in some of these highest elevation mountains already. So it's evolutionarily just adapted to the top of the mountains in the grasslands, of course. So what Abhimanyu did was once we had these maps, he used those maps to plan surveys. And he had all of these grids where each grid he visited 4 times, looking for Nilgiri pipits. And what he found was that it looks like the pipits are already kind of gone from the eastern side of Nilgiris. Uh, I would hesitate to use technical terms, but it's almost like a local extinction in this area. And in Kodaikanal area, which you already saw that there's very little grassland left, you still find some pipits there. And this we think is because the invasion in Kodaikanal is very recent. It's only 30 to 40 years, but Nilgiri's landscape change is about 100 years old. So this may be some kind of extinction debt where somehow the species are kind of holding on, or probably something else, but we're trying to figure that out. And recently, Abhimanyu again published a paper which showed that the global range of the pipit is really like 430 square kilometers only, found only on these two mountains in the grasslands. So it's probably one of the most kind of restricted range endemic bird in India. Yeah. And we also incidentally found out that eBird overestimates the range, what we know of the species. I was trying to allude to the fact that we have only satellite imageries from 1970s. But so what happened before 1970s? If you remember, a lot of the Nilgiris was already converted to tea estates. So what Vijay Ramesh, currently a postdoc collaborating with us and Cornell, what he did was he looked at these Ochterlony's maps from 1800s, and Ochterlony had made these very detailed maps of the landscape. And the data is just ready to come out. It'll come out anytime soon. But the summary is that it looks like most of the plantations were established in the grasslands, not the forests. So forests are still kind of okay, even if you start looking from 1800s to now. It's really the grasslands that have been lost. So coming back to the story about what it means, my other PhD student, Jobin, what he did was, on the left you see these 3 panels. What it shows is what's happened in the landscape. So you have these forest patches isolated by the grassland matrix, and then we go and plant acacia there. It spreads, and now the forests are kind of connected. You have large areas of forest, and the grasslands are kind of isolated in small pockets. So what Jobin wanted to see was, how are these, several threatened endemic birds that are found nowhere else, how do they take to these habitats? So now you have this new woodland habitats that they have never seen before. So it's like some novel habitat. Because these are mountaintop shola forest birds. They don't even go down evergreen forests when the forests are there. So what do they do in this case? And what he did was he surveyed about 450 sites all across the Nilgiris and Anamalais. So it's a huge amount of work with, I don't know, maybe about 70 interns and, large team. And what he found was that a very simplistic naive estimate is that a lot of the novel habitats actually had quite a large presence of these birds. So which means that, if you compare the data that's here, the novel habitat on the first row, and then, the second one is the shola forest, which is a native habitat. You'll see that the birds seem to be occupying a lot of this habitat, a lot of the new habitat, a lot of the timber plantations and so on. So yeah, and then he had a bunch of other analysis. Sorry, I forgot to hide these. Yeah. So essentially, I think what I've been trying to kind of say is that the shola habitat are like islands. These are sky islands, millions of years of evolution, specialized species. The loss of habitat is actually grasslands, not forests. And we show this with remote sensing imageries. And we've also shown that the grassland bird, Nilgiri pipit, is severely impacted. And the forest, including novel, has kind of substantially increased the range of some of these forest birds. And these birds have moved into this. So in my mind, I think this is a somewhat like a restoration conundrum. And what the conundrum is that, yeah, you do want to get back the grasslands. You want to stop the invasive spread. But then now you know that, and more grassland loss, species like Nilgiri pipit are severely impacted. But if you're going to remove a lot of the plantations, you're also going to lose a lot of the birds that are currently occupying that habitat. So I'm not really sure, you know, uh, how this is going to play out, because the government has mandated Tamil Nadu Forest Department to remove hundreds of hectares every year, and Kerala is also working actively. I think that what we would like to do as at least as researchers is to monitor what is happening. And on this note, I'd like to kind of plug for this Shola Grassland Restoration Monitoring Network. Some of us are joining together to form a network, essentially to monitor what is happening here, and maybe see how we can intervene at the policy level or on the ground, to monitor and see how things change. So yeah, so with that, I can kind of I yeah I I'd like to end, and happy to take any questions. I'm sorry if I went over by a few minutes.
Thank you, Robin, for this the presentation. And it was interesting to see so many different threads coming, which is again, I think these are conversations that are always ongoing. Whether it is grasslands versus forests, how do you kind of navigate that issue? Even the way that you had structured the priorities for the map. It was quite interesting to see that the court actually went ahead and gave that order in terms of how do you have to do the removal of the trees to ensure grasslands come back. So it's really nice to see all of this. I think we'll open it up for questions. So if anyone has any questions, you can please raise your hand, and then we can just ask you to unmute. I think that'd be easier. Yeah, so I think there's a question first from Janki. So Janki, would you like to unmute and yeah.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Thanks, ERA, for sharing this interesting, insightful presentation. I had a question for Robin, where he mentions that in the new forest, I think there is one slide where you show that the bird species have adapted to the new forest area as well. So does it mean that their population has increased, or is it that the numbers are still constant, but their range has showing the adaptability, or is it a population expansion? I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's almost like a technical question. But let me answer it a little bit carefully. So essentially, sorry. Yeah. Essentially, what we think is happening is that there are two habitats in question: the grassland birds and the forest birds. So your question is primarily on the forest birds, and yes, the forest birds have increased into these novel habitats. That is there, but it's not like these novel habitats are acting like pure forest. There seems to be a source sink dynamic. They are still coming from the forest, so they do. You still need the shola. You can't just get rid of the shola. So I want to just stress on that. Uh, but yes, the populations are definitely increasing. So yeah, so I call this yin and yang of the timber plantations. I mean, there's a plus and there's also a significant negative on the other side.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to just understand.
Yeah.
That adaptability, it comes at a cost. And of course,
Yeah.
it's not a true representation of the forest. But then do you see, I'm not from ornithologist, so sorry, I don't know the name of the birds that you are saying.
No problem.
But do you see a reciprocal decrease in the other birds which are dependent fully on the grasses?
Two things that I'd like to clarify. One is, yes, there is definitely a decrease in grasslands, in the grassland species, up to local extinction. So that's very clear. The other thing is about adaptability. That's a little bit, again, it's kind of a technical term, because when something adapts to something, it's actually going to something new. What we don't know is if they're just tracking a certain kind of niche, a certain resource or something, which is just found in a, just that went to all of these areas and the bird just moved with it. I don't know if that's clear, but
yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Their food, basically, they're following their food, so
Possibly.
to speak, right?
I mean, we don't have data on this, but this is something that we are actually actively working on. We want to check if it is actually adaptation.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Janki. Thanks, Robin. I think just a follow-up question. Maybe, Sanish, do you want to unmute yourself and kind of ask your questions as well?
Yeah, thanks, Arjun. And Robin, thank you for the amazing talk. I also work on the grasslands, and I'm super happy that you're trying to merge birds with. I mean, I always knew as a bird person, but then I never knew that you will look at restoring habitat so actively. So I have my first question is, there was a slide about the restoration priority. There you talked about, you show pictures of, trees occurring in different patches. So why do you think those the patches where the grasses are existing, why did the trees not establish in those regions? Like, why are they left out? Why the trees could not invade in those places?
You mean in the original, matrix?
In the restoration priority. Yeah, where you talked about restoration priority 1, the trees could not establish in certain regions. Why do you think? Is it because the adaphic features, or
no, I think I may have miscommunicated this. So priority 1 is that you see the timber plantations, they are acacia is basically going wild and it's just invading into the grassland. So the invasion front is actually young saplings. So our priority 1 is those areas where the invasion is just happening. So you can see, actually, if you're at one edge, you can look back and see that in the front are literally, the young saplings up to your knee height. And then as you go towards the older trees, you'll see larger and larger plants. So the priority 1 is just the part that is at the front of that invasion line. Going from the grassland. So if you consider that grassland is without any invasion, and that boundary, that's the number 1 area.
Okay, I have another question. I don't know if I have time, but I'll quickly say this because you said when government removed only, when the forest department removed only acacia, agitatum started coming into the removed system. So I think it's mostly because of when the canopy is removed, the herbaceous layer started taking benefit of it. So I think multiple invasion might also happen. So what do you think? What kind of follow-up activities do you think are crucial in this situation? I know you are not a plant person, but still, do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I think that it's a lot of common sense, and I think what restoration people have been advising all along is that restoration is not should not be seen equivalent to a timber exercise, just removal. So there has to be a lot of maintenance, and I don't need to actually, without being an expert, I just have to observe what the forest department had done earlier in that Pattiyangal site. They did it. They were regularly deweeding until the funding for that project stopped. So, when you stop deweeding, then obviously, things come back in. So, yeah. So now they have a different strategy. They are now planting a lot of this carpet grass, the exotic grass. Uh, I don't know what I mean. It prevents soil erosion according to them, and they
Okay.
don't have a nursery of grassland, grasses, native grasses, and also it prevents a lot of the secondary invasion, is what they're saying.
Okay.
So I would think that this is another experiment that they're trying, and
Okay.
yeah, I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, thanks, Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Anish.
Thanks, Anish. Thanks, Robin. I'll pass it on to Dr. Umesh Vajpayee. So he's raised his hand. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Malik. So actually, I have very little experience uh, of means practical experience from the high altitude grasslands in the Western Ghats, but I work some in the conservation and the assessment of grassland in the Western Himalaya. So there are several, specifically two ways actually, if we consider that. First is the climate change, and the second is what Dr. Already mentioned, that there is an invasion of tree species by forest department, as well as some by the villagers living close to those areas, right? So we can mitigate and we can recover the forest, these grassland these invasive species by cutting in. But is there any solution how we can, I mean, control to that control that there is as there is a shifting in the tree line now, they are going upward, specifically in the Himalayan region. If we talk about the bugyals, so these bugyals are facing two issues. One is from the uh, changing climate. This Because of this changing climate, the tree lines are shifting towards upward upward direction, and second is obviously the anthropogenic movement and disturbances. Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I mean, yeah, there's probably multiple things that are happening, and we still haven't brought climate into the picture. We don't have a tree line in the Western Ghats, but I can imagine that some of these challenges are pretty much the same. I unfortunately don't have any ideas on what to do exactly. These methods of restoration and things like that. I don't have expertise on that. So I can see that even in the chat there are some questions on how to deal with pteridophytes and other things that are coming in. I recognize that it's there, but I would say that if people have ideas, they should just talk to the forest department and offer to do small experimental plots right there, because anyway they have to remove these. So if you offer to kind of do some activities there, which can also provide the data, I think it's a win-win for both science and for people who are trying to do these restoration activities. I think that there's a lot of data that still needs to come to kind of provide a framework for what can be done. And like you rightly pointed out, climatic factors and various local factors. Why is one species invading in one area and not in the other? I mean, this is a small area, and yet you see so much diversity. So yeah, it's very tricky.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks, Umesh, for these questions. I think there's some bird-related. There's one question that had been posted by Badri, and
I can see one
yeah,
by Harinder, which is
hmm.
how does actually invasion impact Nilgiri pipit? Um, it should be quite straightforward as far as we understand. We know again very little about the ecology of the Nilgiri pipit, but having said that, it needs open habitats. It is very restricted to the higher mountains. So with invasion, it's the change in the landscape. It does seem to be able to tolerate mild invasion. So if there is still grass on the floor, you do find Nilgiri pipits. For example, in that site, Mishapuli site that I showed photos of, you would see them sitting on pine and things like that. So it's not a very absolute kind of relationship. It's just that if the cover and the grass goes, that's when the things start becoming difficult. They're even found in fields, agricultural fields left fallow. You do find them up in the hills. So it's not that they can't tolerate any disturbance or anything. They can tolerate a fair bit of disturbance, but it's just that you can't close the canopy. So I think that's where it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Robin. And there's a question from Dr. Mayur Nandekar. Does grazing have any impact over the long period on the grass community, and does that adversely impact on moving of the insectivorous birds?
I don't know again, because there's just not enough studies done on some of these things, especially, let's say, Nilgiri pipit and grazing. The Toda community have had buffaloes for a long time in this habitat. And, if you trek to any of these high elevation sites and you stay in one of those sheds, Nilgiri pipit are everywhere. And if you're washing rice and you happen to throw out some rice, they will immediately be there. So it's like it's that it's not that restrictive in that sense. So I think that I don't know about large scale grazing kind of operations, but small scale sustenance level uh, grazing, I don't see how that can impact things. But there's no data. I'm just making a guess.
Thanks, Robin. So again, I think going back to the Badri's question, and I know it's very specific, but since he's put it up, do you have the idea of a current status of the golden-headed Tsitsicola, and are they also low elevation grasslands?
The first question, I can very happily say that I don't know. Because they are not very, since you've asked the question, I figure that that it's not very easy to find them and see them. We've had some captures, we've seen them in some places, but it's really not that common. And then low elevation grasslands, so this is really tricky because it's just like forest, it's just like evergreen forest. The forests on the top of these mountains are cloud forests. So although you can have continuous evergreen forest going up and becoming this cloud forest, the community is very different. So similarly, low elevation grasslands are there, but my understanding is that the community is different there. And certainly the bird community is also sometimes different. Yeah.
Thanks, Mitesh. Thanks, Robin. And I mean, I was going to say Mitesh because I was reading his question. It really ties into what you just mentioned. See, his question is so Mitesh says he's very curious to know on which argument the court got convinced that the grassland needs to be restored, as most of the grassland is recognized as wasteland.
Yeah.
Sorry?
So it's a good point. I think that I would like to believe that some of it was the data that we showed them with with these satellite imageries, which very clearly showed that areas just 30 years back um, were grasslands. And that is what is today large areas of large extents of acacia and things like that. But I think that's a very simplistic, approach. There are other lines that are there, and I think there are more powerful points that are there. One is people's histories and stories. If you go to any of these sites, people actually remember so if you speak to Rom Whitaker or Ian Lockwood and all that, people who've been in that landscape, they say that they have walked to Berejam when it was all grassland, and now it's all woodland. So it's really happened in one lifetime. So there are these powerful stories that are there. And of course, it's not one lifetime in the Nilgiris. In the Nilgiris, it's slightly different because it's been older. It's over 100 years plus. And there's a really nice study that was done by Atri and few others, where they asked the Toda people about their perception of how the landscape has changed. And they even asked the extent of change. And very surprisingly, their mental perception of how much change has happened has actually matched very closely what we found with our remote sensing satellite imageries. So I think there's a very strong people, connection that is there about the change. There's some local knowledge that goes to inform this, and they must have heard from others as well. It's just that, when there is scientific data, there's satellite imagery data, it seems to lend some, what do you say, validity or some, it just validates something that you already probably know. So I think that's what we did. We just validated what people already knew about the extent of change. And then there is a side argument that came in, which was that acacia and all of these trees are sucking up water, and a lot of the water retention and the role that was being played was by native grasslands. So in that way, basically, people wanted to kind of go away from forests and towards the grasslands. So this is, I think, it's just a combination of various things that came together. Sorry for the long answer.
Thanks, Robin. I think, following this tangent of once, for example, these invasive species have been removed, then this, and there's a question on that which Nandita asks. So, one second. Sorry, Nikita asks, is there any framework you came across or developed for monitoring of the invasive removal sites? Is there something you've come across that the department could also use, or that is something you suggest that we figure with experiments and so on?
Yeah, so it's, like I said, if there was one thing that fits all, I think the forest department would already know it. The problem is that one size just doesn't fit, even within the small landscape. And that's where the problem comes. So these prescriptive things just, they are only, they work only up to a level. So I think some of the generic ideas of restore from the invasion front, keep weeding out things, and some of those things are simpler to prescribe. But once you get into the specifics, it just gets complicated very quickly. And this Shola Grassland Restoration Network, one of the goals is to create some kind of framework, if there are regional differences, to address some of those. And hopefully we should have that. And we hope to collaborate with the ERA network for some things like this.
Thanks, Robin. And I think it'll be interesting to know more about, what kind of collaborators are you looking for, and can we, so I know that, for this specific talk, there were quite a few people who joined from outside of the alliance as well. So maybe it'll be nice if, so I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on what kind of collaborators are you looking for. Can we also then point them towards you, at least all the people who signed up for this talk, when they reach out?
Yeah, sure. That's a great point. Well, I would think that any kind of expertise with grassland restoration. Of course, if you've had some experience working with grasses in the shola habitat, I mean, those folks definitely, because this expertise on how to grow grasses, which grasses to focus on, all of this is like very, very limited. It's not that the expertise is not there in India. It's just that it's too fragmented. It's just not coming together. And that is something that we hope happens a little bit more. But I feel like there's a lot of other things to do as well. One is just general awareness. So if there are people who are, good at social media and many other things, there's a lot in the story here that can be unpacked, but is not available for the public. I mean, I'll give you an example. People who live in Kodaikanal, they go on a drive to Berijam. They see that there are these forest saplings planted. They think that this is a great success of restoration. So even people like in the landscape don't actually know what is the restoration goal. What should this landscape be moving towards? And I think that putting some kind of pressure from the public on the politicians and people who can take action, I think that would be very, 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 very useful. I don't know if that's aiming for a lot, but yeah, why not?
Of course, and I think that's the thing with restoration or with all this kind of work that we're trying to do. We need people to come from look at the problem from all sides. It's not just one approach that is ever going to work. So no,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. You're
Yeah.
going to add something, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just want to add that in terms of technical knowledge and monitoring, we do now have this network where there are scientists who know various aspects of vegetation ecology and birds and other organisms coming together to kind of work collaboratively to monitor some of these sites where restoration is happening. So if there are people with some expertise, we'd like to kind of invite them. Whatever expertise you have, reach out to us, and we are happy to kind of we haven't started yet, so it'd be good to have you on board. There are a few other questions I can see on the chat. I don't know if should I. There's Madhumita who has a question about overestimation of pipit. Yeah. Yeah, Madhumita, your guess is absolutely right. The problem with eBird and citizen science data is that there's some accuracy issues that come in. In fact, it's not that big a problem. Everybody makes mistakes identifying some of these confusing birds. In fact, BNHS, the museum, had paddyfield pipit Nilgiri pipit tagged as paddyfield pipit. So, I mean, yeah, this can happen to the best of us. So that is the problem of the overestimation. Suprabha asked if grass is flowering where they are. The natural ones, yes, of course. But in the planted areas, in some areas, yes, it's there. But I don't think, I haven't followed up too much in some of the Kodaikanal areas where they have done the planting, the grass planting. In Kerala, the Pattiyangal side is particularly looking very good. So yeah, I don't know about there are 2 new sites that Kerala has. I haven't been there yet. Badri asks if there is any scientific study on the sponge-like effect of these grasslands. Yes, the KFRI has a book on shola ecosystem. Unfortunately, it's not available online. You have to buy it from KFRI. But that has a chapter which shows how much water retention is there, and they have different habitats and so on. So there is a scientific study.
Thanks, Robin. And I think that covers all the questions that at least were there on the chat. And thank you so much for taking the time to answer each of the questions very patiently and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been great. Thanks for having me, and nice connecting with so many of you. Yeah. Great to be here.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining this call. It was really nice to have you all and participate with us on this webinar. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Bye.